Alright, hey, Jeff here. It's time for the 2021 vinyl tag. I've been watching some of the other people do them. Figured I'd jump on board. Try to do one every year too, so let us get this going. This is going to be the Tales from the Crate one. Anyway, let's get right into this because I know that these can be kind of long. I've got the questions here. I got a stack of records here. Let's get right into it. Discovery in 2020. Well, let's think about a band that is a newer band that I just discovered this year. So I'm going to go back to one that I've mentioned a couple times, and that's Vanik. I discovered them in October in the Metalhead box, and I thought they were really cool, and I have sought out their previous releases. So I felt like this would qualify more. They're a fairly new modern band, and I have tracked down some of their other material. Secondly, a quarantine buy. Now, in my video before last, I was looking at my vinyl records I had added to my Discogs in 2020 and found that it was in excess of 350. It was like 370 or so. Most of those obviously are quarantine buys, so this was a tough one. I've bought a lot, and of course it's, you know, you do that, you mail order stuff. So what I was looking at to limit myself here is, what did I actually go out to a store during the quarantine time and buy? Now, there was a lot of those too, but then I thought, okay, there's one place I went that I bought some stuff where not only did I have to wear a mask, he didn't want to let you in the beginning. The store is limited to only having 4 people in there, and he required you to wear gloves. So I thought, if anything screams quarantine, it would be going to that store the once or twice I did last year, because most other stores were a little more relaxed. But I thought that's a quarantine buy. So, and the day that I went, I bought a bunch of things, but I went ahead and mentioned this Trouble, Plastic Greenhead. I also brought these in because the next question is an album you want to find in 2021. Now, not this album, but they are, after I buy this one was a reissue from, I don't know, somewhere in the teens. And in the past few months, some of their other Trouble albums have been reissued by another company overseas. Some of the ones that have been near impossible to find on vinyl over the years, including Manic Frustration, which I would like to find. That's one that I hope to get in 2021. And some of the other ones, if they release some of their other ones for this year, then I want to pick those up and fill in some of them where the Trouble collection. The box set, have a couple options here, but I'm going to go with one of my favorites, Adam Ant, King of the Wild Frontier. This is a mega box set. It's got a book, a record, a poster, a bunch of cards, a bunch of CDs. Just, it's full. One of my favorite albums, a concept album. Now, I could show probably half a dozen by this particular artist. I went ahead and chose the one that came out last year. What list of mine would be complete if it wasn't Neil Morse on there somewhere? Sola Gratia. It is a concept album about the Saul, who later became the Apostle Paul. So it is of biblical nature. But again, it's not real preachy. It's just a story of the situations he went through, struggling with the early church. Love Neil Morse, and the last couple albums he's done have been concept albums, and that one is just a newer one. An album where the band changed directions. Okay, I'll get some backstory on this. I'm going to show this. Mortification, Break the Curse, 1990. Now, Break the Curse, 1990, was actually originally released as a cassette release from the band under the band name of Light Force. Light Force was a band in Australia that was kind of, you know, kind of early Maidenish, Paul Di'Anno, punkish, borderline metal type band. The band kind of fell apart. The bass player went on, started a new band with some other musicians, and totally changed directions. Went from that sound to more of a death metal, guttural, blah sound, and released a cassette under the name Light Force called Break the Curse. Then, after that, because of the style change, I assume, they changed their name to Mortification. This was released on vinyl as Mortification. Break the Curse, though, was a Light Force release originally. Now, I was able to go back, and this is a magazine I used to run, a Christian rock magazine, but anyway. And in here, just to show the proof here, we've got Light Force, Break the Curse. And I say, well, the rumor is true. Light Force has gone thrash. That's what we called it back then, because, you know, the whole death metal thing was kind of new. To me, the bad news was finding out that the band's members had totally changed. They really should have changed the name, for this is a totally new band with only Steve Rowe on bass and a totally new sound. Now, I'm not saying that I predicted it or had any influence on it. A white label promo. I've seen a couple or had a couple of these over the years, but this is the first one that came to mind. Ron Go Dare, or Go Dirt. Anyway, I picked this up just because I thought they looked cool, and you know, he was in a band before that was, you know, a 70s psych band, and I bought this on Discogs a while back, and I didn't even notice it. The guy didn't sell it as this, but it is a white label promo for promotional copy. So I knew I had this. I probably have a couple more in there somewhere that I'm not coming to mind. A comp album. Now I only have a couple of these because I don't usually buy them, mainly because when it comes to like best of compilations, things along that line, I don't do that because I buy the full album. But I do have some that are more compilations of local bands type stuff, and I actually have these two that I bought at 2 different times, 2 different places. Just happened to get both copies, and they're Pure Rock and the Son of Pure Rock, and they are, you know, California bands from the unknown, unsigned bands. Album that tells a story to me. Striper's Yellow and Black Attack. This came out in 1984. I picked it. I saw it in the record store. I ignored it for the most part because it says this: special thanks, #1 Jesus Christ the Boss Man. Not that I was opposed to that, but at the time I was a church-going kid, but I listened to a lot of typical metal, and I thought I didn't have much of a fondness for what's considered Christian rock at that time. It didn't tend to be very appealing. You had the Petras and things along that line, but you know, here I am listening to the Motley Crues and the Judas Priests and the Metallicas. So I kind of was like, kind of poo-pooed the album. But for some reason, a couple months later, in late '84, I went ahead and picked it up. I was in the military at the time, I believe, and I had this. So this would have been my first real Christian metal album. And it was in '85 that I made a decision to kind of start over, rededicate my life. And I threw away, and I hate to think this now, threw away hundreds and hundreds of records. Just threw them away. I kept one. This one. This is the original one that I bought in the '80s. This was the only album pretty much that survived that throwout. And then I went out and picked out other albums that I could find that were along the same lines that I knew of, that I just was available at the time. Ended up being the first Leviticus album, the first Saint album, the first Messiah Prophet album, some Barnabas albums, and that was about it. So my record collection went from hundreds of records to about 4 or 5. But when I threw them all away, I kept this one. This is actually what they call, I mean, it's chopped wrong. I didn't realize this at the time, didn't know, but the hand here, you know, you only see his finger. You got initials for the band members on here, but these are chopped off down here. You don't see them. This was cropped incorrectly. I didn't know that. Didn't care back in the day. I didn't realize that it had out. There was also a cropped incorrectly version on yellow. I picked this up just a year or 2 ago. Found it in the store. So there was 2 yellow, a yellow and a black, which makes sense. And then later they repressed it to correct the cropping. So now you've got the entire hand, and you've got all the label, all of this here. And then I have that on black, which I found. I don't think that one was released on yellow. I haven't heard, but I've only got that. So yeah, I have 3 of those, but the one is the original one from the '80s. An album that needs a vinyl pressing. I have 2. Well, we were talking about Stryper. Let's talk about Stryper again. It is their covers album where they go back and they record a bunch of songs from bands that influenced them. So you've got everything on here from Kansas to Black Sabbath to Kiss to Saxon. It goes on. Iron Maiden, Van Halen. It's everything. So I'm hoping, you know, we are seeing some of the back catalog talking about being reissued. I just saw notice that Murder by Pride and Reborn are coming back out. Even though Reborn was on vinyl, Reborn and Murder by Pride are both being reissued overseas. I've already pre-ordered those, so I'm hoping they'll go back and do it. This would be cool though, because it's them doing, you know, non-Christian songs that are just, I think it would appeal to a large audience. I do kind of hope that maybe they'll change the cover. Honestly, I'm not really into that cover. I've just never. It just kind of looks kind of remedial for me. On the back, it's got him kind of changed. I don't know. I don't know. The other one I wanted to mention, though, is Neil Morris, of course, Sola Scriptura, one of his great albums, but it was a concept album, sort of like the Sola Gratia that I showed. This is about the life of Martin Luther, but anyway, it was one of his heaviest ones. Most people agree, and I think it'd be great if they had it on vinyl. All right, next, a common album. Peter Frampton Alive. Come on. Don't they give those away when you move into a neighborhood? An uncommon album, Jet Circus Step on It. This album is a Swedish band, a Swedish import. I happened to find one really surprisingly not too long ago, like in the past 2 years. I had the CD version of this import album. It was later released in America, had one different track on it, but this was the original release. But what happened is the band did not like the mastering on it, and they recalled them. So according to the website, there are only about 120 of these in existence. And I happen to get one in superb condition. So they are rare, but they're not too terribly costly because it's a little known band. They put out one album and kind of disappeared. We know them because the bass player and singer were in the band Leviticus, and it was one of their greatest albums. And then they spun off and did this. Show an EP. I have a handful of those. Started a days, happened to find Armored Saint. This is Armored Saint's first EP. I remember buying this back in the day. This is a reissue, but I remember buying this back in the day. Saw a picture of them, loved the armor and look. Didn't know a lot about them because I'm on the East Coast, they're on the West Coast. Bought it, fell in love with it. Been one of my favorite bands. Their early stuff is some of my favorite stuff. This is a reissue that I picked up and love it. Yes, EP. A girl group. Let's go with something a little more obscure. We got Leather Angel. This is another one of those. I had this album back when it came out in the 80s. I bought it before I went in the military. I have a picture that if I can find, which I think I've shown before, so it might be on my computer, of me the day before I left for the military. I went out and bought a bunch of albums, this being one of them. Basically, didn't have time to really listen to them, had to file them away before I left. So it was a long time before I ever got to hear it, but it was one of the ones I bought right before I left. You know, it's not the greatest album. It's pretty cool, though. It's a cool piece of history to have. I believe one of the members was in a relationship with Nikki Sixx. He had, something to do with the band, helping out or whatever. And they went on to change her name to Jaded Lady and did a couple more releases. An album cover you love. Mama's Boys. This is their self-titled, pretty much their first American release. It's kind of a compilation of tracks from some of their earlier releases released in America. Mama We're All Crazy Now is the video that came from this and kind of what this image harkens to, and I think was a new song for this particular release. But overall, most of the songs were previously released. But the thing I like about it is it's really heavy metal looking, right? You got the fire, but then you got this grandma back here. She's all chained and studded out. She's holding a flying V guitar, which is what the guitar player played, and a fiddle. I just thought that it's just so unique. It's like a heavy metal and the fiddle and everything, and that's how the band are. They've got that Celtic root to them, and so they have that feel and the violins and stuff, but they're definitely, a hard rock, borderline metal. So I always love that cover. An album you've listened to the most. So yeah, this is a tough one. When it comes to my go-to albums that when I'm in the mood, I'm going to go to that album, and I find that I feel that I have heard this album so many times, and I never get tired of it, over and over and over, all the time, and only one really came to mind. And it's weird, I know. Dirk Wears White Socks by Adam and the Ants. This is the first Adam and the Ants album in the 70s, before everything changed. And it's the most different album that he's done. After this, he had a whole new band. The manager of the band just took the whole band from Adam and put a new singer in front of him and became Bow Wow Wow. And then Adam was forced to create New Ants. And the second album has two drummers, Tribal Beats, which is the one I showed earlier in the box set. And it's just a different sound. But those two are my favorite albums. This is one of them. I don't really, it's just, I like it. It's just really odd. Now, it did come out in America, and this is the one I probably have had the longest, is this particular American release. Songs are slightly different, a little change here or there, truncate this song, blah, 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 remix them up a little bit. And so This is the one I've, had longer over the years to a degree. Now, back in the day, when I bought this, when it came out, like 82, original release was like 79. It was reissued in America once he started gaining popularity. They reissued it in America 82 or so, a couple years later. When I bought this in the store, I was digging through the cassettes over in the cassette section of the store, and I found this. Had no clue what the difference was or why, but I bought it just because I loved Adam Ant. I've had this cassette since the 80s. This is the English version, the UK version that was released. This was an import cassette, and I bought it. So I have listened to this particular album quite a bit. But of course, the CD I had for the longest time was the American version. So I have had the UK version as long as I've had the American version. And then I finally found it on vinyl just a year and a half ago or so. But I listen to that album all the time. I don't know. Quirky. I like it. An album you have to have an OG of. Now, honestly, I'm not the type of person... I have nothing for this because I'm not the type of person that is as worried about pressings. I'm fine with the remaster if it's done right. I'm fine with an OG if I find it. So I don't have any particular albums that I can think of at all that I'm like, I have to have the original of that. I don't want a remaster. I don't want a repressing. So I have nothing for that. Last album purchased. Now, I have an album that's going to arrive today from Amazon. That would be the last album purchased. Oddly enough, it's a compilation album too. If it had arrived, I could have shown it for two questions here. So that's literally the last album I purchased. And then, of course, I've received a lot of albums in the mail in the past couple weeks, but they were purchased weeks ago. So those don't count, even though they're the last albums received. So I had to think back, when was the last time, aside from the mail order stuff, that I actually went to the store and bought an album? And it would be a couple of videos ago when I went back to that store with the gloves and the mask, and this was one of them. And I'm only picking this one because it was Lita Ford. I had also picked up the Heaven album and the Black and Blue. So I figured I was probably in the alphabetic order. I found Black and Blue, I probably found Heaven, and then I found Lita Ford. So this would have been the last album I picked up and purchased, but I did pick up a couple albums at that time. So an album they just don't get. I've talked about this album before. I'm a huge Kiss fan, but I'm also a huge Peter Criss solo album fan. The most hated solo albums of the four. In the day when this came out, I listened to this one the most. I don't know why. It was different. It's way different. I love it. It's great songs. The songs are done well. I didn't care that it didn't sound like Kiss. I thought Paul Stanley's album sounded too much like Kiss. I love Gene Simmons' album. It sounded, it had some quirkiness to it. And Ace Frehley's is still my favorite. But I wore this album out back in the day. And it is still, I love this album. And people don't like it. If this was not associated with Kiss, non-Kiss fans would have bought it and probably enjoyed it. People who are into this style of music. It's more traditional, almost 50s and 60s sounding stuff. If you took the Kiss logo off of this, all association with Kiss, I think this album would have been great. But on the other hand, that kind of music is not appealing to the Kiss fans. So you've got it's kind of in a catch-22. A punk album. One of the most punk albums I have would be The Crucified. Now, this is, punk is short, but this is a pretty much a 7-song album. It was a cassette-only release. It got released on a 7-inch vinyl. They have other albums that I have on vinyl, but this is raw, true punk. Their first major release had more of a metal tint to it. He still had the same vocals that were punkish, but the music was a lot more tight. It was very thrashy with punk vocals, but this was pretty much raw punk. Favorite 2020 reissue. I just did a video on my favorite 2020 reissues, and I'm going to go back and say these are my favorite. The 2 Paradox reissues, just because never on vinyl, only cassette releases back in the day, and to have them on vinyl and CD remastered and cleaned up officially and not just band releases made it my favorite. These are just the highlight of my year, is getting these released on both CD and vinyl, because again, they were just a little unknown Christian band that I loved in the 80s, and to have them now as an official release all these years later made them my favorite. That's it. Time is over. 2021 tag. Thanks for watching. I will be back. Rock on.